What's up YouTube, BMR here, and today we're going to go ahead and discuss the XRX by TechStorm and the Atomic DRZ version 2. I want to give you guys my thoughts on this. I want this to be a faster video. If you guys want more details, I have at least 5 to 7 videos about the DRZ going in depth about this. I also have a review out on the XRX, and I have a full build video of this. I built the whole thing on camera, so if you guys have any questions or you want a little bit more detail, refer back to those videos. I want this to be a little bit quicker for people who are just kind of, really wetting their feet with the rear-wheel drive drift community and, just trying to get a little bit of research information. Before we start talking about these chassis, I want to give a couple honorable mentions. Number one is the MJ Modify by My Name is MJ. So it's a K989 rear-wheel drive drift conversion kit for those cars, and they look like a really, really nice kit. And the cool thing, and the reason why I want to mention this, is because MJ will build it for you. If you are brand new to rear-wheel drive drifting and you don't have the skills to build a car at all, or it just seems too daunting, MJ can do it for you. I'm pretty sure he can send you a ready-to-run chassis as far as what I know. I'm not 100% sure on that, but at least it'll be nearly complete. It'll be fully assembled and you just need to throw a receiver on it and you should be good to go from there. So So the MJ Modify is the chassis I want to shout out. And also the Drift Art version 2 is a beautiful chassis, carbon fiber. It looks fantastic. But the thing with the Drift Art chassis is they seem like they're a really complex build, number one. And number two, it seems like the setups for them seems a little bit more complex too. I'm going to go ahead and say that's more of an intermediate level build or an expert level build, just because of the fact that the Drift Art is a belt driven chassis and the adjustment settings for it seems like they slide around a little bit. So it just, to me, seems like it's a more advanced chassis. And then finally, I want to also give a shout out to the GLD, the GL Racing Drift Chassis. It's very similar to the XRX. So I'm going to go ahead and say the XRX is the better chassis because all the aluminum and ease of build, the fact a lot of these parts are pre-assembled for you. So I'm going to say the XRX and GLD are very comparable, but the XRX edges it out slightly. So now that I have that out of the way, I also want to preface this by saying that all drift chassis are roughly equivalent as far as rear-wheel drive drift chassis, as far as this chassis and this one, or if there was an MJ Modify, or if there was a Super Skeeter out here, or a BMRX, it doesn't matter what it is, guys. They're all very, very comparable. The thing is you need to spend the time tuning your suspension, tuning all of your settings, your camber, your toe, your motors, your tire compounds, all that kind of stuff is critical for rear-wheel drive drift setups. Also your gyro, having dual EPA settings, all that stuff is really, really critical. And if you have all that dialed in, like once I get this chassis fully built, it's going to be roughly equivalent to my DRZ. So I'm going to go ahead and say that it's not necessarily that one chassis is going to be better than the other. It's just they're going to have slight differences in between them and things to note. So starting off in the front, I want to talk about the XRX's steering package. So this has an aluminum steering rack. You can see it in there and it's sliding on ball bearings. So this is a super solid steering system. And honestly, I'm going to say that it's a little bit more stable than the DRZ. So the DRZ has this post system in here and then you have a bell crank. And the fact that your sliding rack over here is sandwiched between bearings, it's literally, there's a bearing in the front and then 2 in the back and it's crushing it in between, not crushing, but you know what I mean, making it so there's no wobble. So theoretically, I'm going to say that this front end is a little bit better just because of the fact that, it's not going to wobble as much. But saying that, the DRZ has a very, very good system up here. There's still ball bearings in this steering system, but the thing is maybe if you're going over hard cracks or really uneven surfaces, it might introduce a little bit more wobble because of the fact, it's an upright post. So that might be an issue, but, I drift on super flat, smooth surfaces, so that's never an issue for me, but I just wanted to go ahead and mention that. Another thing to note with these front ends is both of these have these steering stoppers. So these are steering angle limiters, and what that does is these actually catch on the arm right there. And what that will do is keep your front end from going past its limit. So it's awesome that both of these chassis have this. This is something that you definitely want on a drift chassis, is these steering angle limiters. And so they both have that. So that's not really a consideration between them, but I just want to mention that they do have them. Moving on, both chassis have monoshocks up front. These monoshocks are great. They're just slightly different styles. This is made by a Crawler company, apparently, and this is actually Atomic's monoshock over here. They both perform roughly equivalent. I mean, there's nothing to really say bad about them. A thing to note about monoshocks is they do allow more steering angle, because as you guys can see, it can get in there, and these posts are further away from your wheels, whereas if you had the actual strut styles, they do have issues depending depending on your wheel offset with catching on the posts. So I highly recommend going for a monoshock, whether you have the XRX or the DRZ. Another thing I want to note real quick up in the front ends is the XRX actually has a wide front end. And you can't get around that without modifying your parts. So I actually have both of my front ends over here. It's hard to tell, but they're pretty much the same width. So what I did is over here, this one is a 1.5 millimeter offset tire. And these over here are 0 millimeter offset tires. And as you guys can see, I went in and I sanded all my linkages down to make it so that this can clear now, and look, it rolls perfectly smooth. But what this means is I'm gonna be able to use this on a narrow body. So playing with your wheel offsets and, you know, making note of your linkages, if anything's rubbing or anything like that, that's one way of making this front end smaller. So it does come wide stock, so keep that in mind, but you can easily adjust it by just sanding your linkages or removing some material from this plastic part of the linkage and then just literally just screwing it in further. Same thing for the bottom, you can just move this whole wheel in, but you know, I went the easier route of just changing my wheel offset and then going ahead and sanding my linkage down. Another thing to note is the motors. So as you guys can see, these are both running atomic motors. They have the exact same setups in them, but the thing that sets the XRX aside is the fact that this has the lower motor mount, but you can go ahead and reverse this motor mount, flip it up top, and then you have a high center of gravity, high motor mount. And I think that's really cool, and that's the whole reason why I got this chassis. But when you do set it up for that high motor mount, note that you will need to use a smaller size motor. You need to use the 15 millimeter can size motors or get a larger pinion gear. But I don't have a larger pinion gear and I have a large can motor, so I have to use it in the lower mount setting, but eventually I'll get a high motor mount for it and that will be really cool. So over here on the DRZ, this does not have that option at all. You cannot put a high motor mount on it, but you know, it doesn't really necessarily need it. I just think it's pretty cool. It's a little bit, you know, I don't know if it's a gimmick, but either way, I think they're really cool having those high motor mounts. Last thing I want to note for these rear ends is both rear ends will come with this stock style, normal standard rear end with collars. They're both really good suspensions. I like the XRX suspension, but over here, I do have a monoshock on here because monoshocks, if you have dual monoshocks, what it will do is allow your body to basically pitch and roll a little bit easier, right? That's great. But my issue is this spring, it's not strong enough to actually lift my rear end back up, sadly. So I need to get a stronger spring back here. But basically, I just want to say that both of these chassis, whether it's the DRZ or the XRX, will come with this style rear end, which is a great style rear end, and they both have collars, so you can adjust your preload to adjust your tension settings. And then you can also always go ahead and get monoshocks for it. So if you see a chassis with a really cool suspension system on it, don't freak out because you can switch suspension systems around, you know what I mean? So that's not as big of a consideration. So overall, I think these are great chassis, but as you guys can see, I'm a little bit partial to the DRZs. I love the gold. I have my second DRZ sitting back here waiting for me to build it. I just need the parts to come in and then I can. So I just wanted to quickly go over some of the big points to mention for these chassis. Like I said, once you've dialed them in, they're roughly equivalent, but you have to put in that time. And the thing with the XRX is you get a lot of parts pre-built on this chassis, so you don't have to worry about all those headaches. So that's kind of huge. Whereas the DRZ, you do need to build it from scratch. None of the parts will be pre-assembled for you. You have to assemble your differential and smooth out any burrs in there. Make sure it's completely sanded smooth. Check for any mismolds, injection lines. So like around this motor back here, there was big molding lines that I had to take off, little things like that. So it's just points to note that basically this chassis will take a lot more attention to detail, but saying that, it's a bit more rewarding once you've built it. You know, if you like building model kits and stuff, which I do, you will love building the DRZ because there's a lot to do to it. It's a lot of fun and it takes hours and hours to build. Whereas this one over here, if you buy the upgrade parts like I have on this one with the differential and your front sliding rack and all that kind of stuff on there, then it's going to be pre-assembled and you just basically slap it together like a Lego. And it literally took me an hour to build this on camera. I probably could have built this in 30 minutes if I was just sitting by myself. So the level of difficulty for the builds is this is a beginner level build and this is more of an intermediate to beginner level build, but you know, just requires more attention to detail. But honestly, DRZ is my favorite. So I'm going to go ahead and say the DRZ is the better chassis just because I like mine more. I've had more fun with it, but you know, this XRX is going to be sweet. I just need to do a little bit more tuning and it'll be there eventually. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the video right here. I don't want to keep rambling. I have in-depth videos on the XRX and the DRZ if you guys need more information, or if you guys have questions, leave them down in the comments below. But you know, like I said, DRZ is my favorite, but the XRX, you can't go wrong with it. You can't go wrong with a BMRX or a TRC or a MJ Modified. None of those chassis you can go wrong with. They're all outstanding chassis. You just got to put the work into it. So anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you guys have a wonderful day, and see you next time.